According to data from the U.S. Department of Justice, between 1980 and 2015, approximately 20% of all homicides were related to domestic conflicts, with 64% of the victims in these cases being women. In Jackson, Mississippi, on a humid summer morning in 2007, a distress call was received at the 911 dispatch center. Evelyn Marshall, a concerned grandmother, reported that she had not heard from her daughter, Patrice Johnson, or her grandson, Caleb, in 5 days. Evelyn explained that she had tried calling and visiting their home multiple times, but there was no response. She feared something terrible had happened and pleaded for the police to check on them. A patrol unit was dispatched to the Johnson residence, a modest home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The house appeared undisturbed at first glance. The windows were closed, the curtains drawn, and the mailbox overflowed with unopened letters. After knocking and receiving no response, officers obtained Evelyn's permission to enter the house. Inside, the house was eerily still. Everything seemed orderly, almost too perfect, as if frozen in time. Caleb's toys were scattered across the living room floor, and a half-empty juice box sat on the coffee table, its contents long since gone warm. Patrice's handbag rested on the kitchen counter, with her car keys and phone still inside. The refrigerator was stocked with fresh groceries, and her car remained parked in the driveway. Officers noted that there were no immediate signs of struggle, no broken glass, overturned furniture, or evidence of forced entry. However, the silence and the lack of activity raised suspicions. It was unusual for a mother and child to leave without taking essentials like a phone or wallet. The officers conducted a brief search of the house but found nothing to suggest where Patrice and Caleb might have gone. The police began canvassing the neighborhood, speaking with neighbors who described Patrice as a kind but private individual. Several neighbors recalled seeing Caleb playing in the yard earlier in the week but admitted they hadn't noticed anything unusual recently. No one had seen Patrice or Caleb leave the house, and no one could recall any suspicious activity in the area. The investigation led officers to contact Ronald Johnson, Patrice's husband and Caleb's father, who was a commercial airline pilot. Reached by phone, Ronald sounded alarmed and confused. He explained that he had been on a long-haul flight for the past 2 weeks and had only just returned to the U.S. the day before. He claimed he had no idea where Patrice or Caleb might be and insisted he was as desperate for answers as everyone else. With no clear leads, the case was classified as a missing persons investigation. Officers secured the residence and began gathering information on Patrice and Caleb's last known activities. Evelyn provided additional details, explaining that Patrice was a devoted mother and highly responsible. She had never gone off without notifying someone, which made her sudden disappearance even more concerning. Meanwhile, the police obtained phone records, financial transactions, and personal information for both Patrice and Ronald to establish a timeline of events. Every detail of their lives became a potential clue. Officers flagged Patrice's bank accounts and credit cards for any unusual activity and coordinated with local hospitals and shelters to see if she or Caleb had been admitted. The absence of any clear signs of struggle left investigators uneasy. The pristine condition of the house, combined with the lack of communication from Patrice, suggested either a carefully orchestrated departure or something far more sinister. The unopened mail, Caleb's abandoned toys, and Patrice's untouched phone painted a picture of a family that had vanished without warning. As the day wore on, the investigation gained urgency. The missing mother and child became the center of police efforts, with additional resources brought in to help uncover the truth. Officers began piecing together the fragments of their lives, hoping that somewhere in the details lay the key to solving the mystery of their disappearance. As the hours turned into days, the search for Patrice and Caleb intensified. Police reviewed the limited evidence from the Johnson household, focusing on every detail that might provide a lead. The lack of physical evidence made the case especially challenging, and investigators turned their attention to the people closest to Patrice in the hope of uncovering any underlying issues that could explain the disappearance. Evelyn Marshall, Patrice's mother, was the first to be questioned in detail. She painted a picture of her daughter as a loving, devoted mother who prioritized Caleb's happiness above all else. Patrice had been a paralegal, known for her professionalism and dedication, and Evelyn described her as responsible and level-headed. However, she hesitated before revealing a critical piece of information. In recent months, Patrice had confided in her about feeling distant from her husband, Ronald. Evelyn had dismissed it as a phase, thinking every marriage had its ups and downs. Now, she couldn't help but wonder if there had been something more troubling beneath the surface. Police expanded their interviews to Patrice's close friends and colleagues, eventually speaking with Monica Harris, Patrice's best friend. Monica was visibly shaken by the news of Patrice's disappearance and offered insight that shifted the investigation. Patrice had been increasingly suspicious of Ronald's behavior, Monica said. He was often absent, citing his demanding schedule as a pilot, but Patrice had begun noticing inconsistencies in his explanations. There were missed calls, unexplained absences, and canceled family plans. Monica revealed that Patrice had recently shared her fears that Ronald might be unfaithful. She had even mentioned finding receipts for expensive dinners and gifts that didn't match their household spending habits. According to Monica, Patrice was planning to confront Ronald about her suspicions when he returned from his latest trip. This revelation prompted investigators to take a closer look at Ronald's actions. Subpoenas were issued for his phone records, credit card transactions, and flight logs. The data revealed a pattern of frequent communication with another individual, a man named Stephen Carter, who worked as a co-pilot at the same airline. The nature of their conversations was unclear, but their frequency raised red flags. Police reached out to Stephen for questioning. Stephen was cooperative but visibly uncomfortable during the interview. He admitted to being in a relationship with Ronald, describing it as an affair that had been ongoing for nearly a year. Stephen explained that Ronald had confided in him about feeling trapped in his marriage, torn between his duties as a husband and father and his desire to live openly. Despite this, Ronald had insisted he didn't want to leave Patrice because of Caleb, whom he adored. Stephen claimed he had no knowledge of Patrice or Caleb's whereabouts and expressed shock at their disappearance. This revelation sent ripples through the investigation. The police now considered the possibility of a domestic conflict that had escalated into something far more sinister. They confronted Ronald with what they had learned. Initially defensive, Ronald eventually admitted to the affair but vehemently denied any involvement in his family's disappearance. He claimed he had been overseas on a long-haul flight during the critical days when Patrice and Caleb went missing. His flight logs, corroborated by the airline, appeared to support his alibi. Despite Ronald's assertions, investigators couldn't ignore the growing evidence of marital strain and deceit. Further inquiries revealed additional tensions in the Johnson household. Patrice's co-workers noted that she had seemed distracted and stressed in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. One colleague mentioned overhearing Patrice on the phone, her tone sharp and accusatory, likely during a conversation with Ronald. Another remembered Patrice mentioning Caleb's increasing awareness of the tension between his parents, which had begun to affect his normally cheerful demeanor. With Ronald's alibi temporarily holding, police shifted their focus to tracing Patrice's financial activity. Bank records showed no unusual withdrawals or charges, further deepening the mystery. Patrice's phone remained inactive, leaving no digital trail. The absence of any movement or communication suggested either a calculated disappearance or a scenario in which Patrice was unable to act on her own behalf. As the investigation progressed, the focus on Ronald intensified. His calm demeanor during questioning, combined with the revelations about his double life, led police to wonder whether he had been hiding more than just an affair. The strain of his marriage, his secret relationship, and the potential fallout from being exposed all pointed to a motive for drastic action. Still, the lack of direct evidence linking him to Patrice and Caleb's disappearance left investigators without enough to charge him. The tension in the case mirrored the tensions within the Johnson household, where love, betrayal, and secrecy had created a volatile situation. Police knew they were missing a crucial piece of the puzzle, one that could unravel the truth behind Patrice and Caleb's sudden vanishing. As the days stretched on, the urgency to find them grew, and with it, the pressure to uncover the secrets buried within their fractured family. The search for Patrice and Caleb intensified as the days turned into weeks. With every passing moment, the sense of urgency deepened, and the police combed through the limited evidence with renewed focus. The Johnsons' home became the epicenter of the investigation, as officers meticulously re-examined every room, searching for something they might have missed during their initial sweep. The lack of physical evidence made progress slow, but there was an unshakable feeling that the truth was buried somewhere within those walls. A breakthrough came when cadaver dogs were brought in to assist in the investigation. The dogs, trained to detect the faintest traces of human decomposition, alerted near the backyard fence, a section of soil that appeared recently disturbed. Officers dug carefully, but what they unearthed was not what they had expected: no bodies, only a small cache of old household trash and debris. Frustrated but undeterred, the police continued their search, broadening their focus to include the entire property. Back inside the house, officers noticed something they had overlooked during their initial examination. In the basement, faint scuff marks on the concrete floor led to a locked door. The door appeared unremarkable at first glance, its worn frame blending in with the rest of the basement. However, the fresh scratches on the floor suggested recent movement, as if something heavy had been dragged across the surface. The officers forced the door open, revealing a small, dark room beyond. The sight inside stopped them cold. Patrice Johnson was there, barely alive, bound to a chair with ropes that had cut into her wrists and ankles. Her head slumped forward, her body bruised and emaciated. The stale air reeked of neglect and despair, and the faint light from a bare bulb illuminated the grim scene. Her breathing was shallow, and her skin was pale, marked by days of dehydration and malnourishment. Emergency medical responders were called immediately, and they worked swiftly to stabilize Patrice. She was unresponsive but alive, her fragile state a testament to the unimaginable ordeal she had endured. The ropes that bound her had left deep impressions on her skin, and the bruises across her body suggested she had suffered physical abuse. As EMTs carried her out on a stretcher, officers took photographs of the scene, cataloging every detail for evidence. The discovery of Patrice brought relief to the investigation but also intensified the search for Caleb, who was still missing. Patrice's condition indicated she had been restrained for days, possibly since the very moment she disappeared. Officers expanded their efforts to locate Caleb, combing through every lead, but no immediate clues surfaced. The case took on a new level of urgency. Finding Caleb alive became the top priority. While Patrice was rushed to the hospital, officers began piecing together the circumstances of her captivity. The locked room was small and sparsely furnished, with a single chair and a dirty blanket on the floor. A bucket in the corner suggested that her captor had anticipated keeping her there for an extended period. The lack of food or water reinforced the calculated cruelty of her treatment. As police examined the room further, they found a small but significant piece of evidence, a single airline baggage tag tucked into a corner of the room. The tag bore Ronald Johnson's name and a recent date, tying him directly to the scene. The discovery cast a damning shadow over Ronald, who had claimed ignorance of Patrice and Caleb's whereabouts. Meanwhile, at the hospital, doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize Patrice. Her injuries were severe but not life-threatening, and after several days of care, she regained consciousness. Weak but determined, she insisted on speaking to the police as soon as she was able. When officers arrived, she recounted the events leading up to her ordeal. Patrice explained that Ronald had returned home unexpectedly early from one of his flights, confronting her about their crumbling marriage. In a heated argument, he confessed to his affair and justified his actions, claiming he felt trapped and unhappy. Furious, Patrice had threatened to leave him, taking Caleb with her. She had warned Ronald that he would never see his son again. Enraged by her defiance, Ronald lashed out, striking her. The argument escalated into violence, and in a fit of rage, he restrained her and locked her in the basement. Patrice revealed that before leaving, Ronald had taken Caleb with him, stating that he intended to bring their son to his mother's home in another country. She believed he had planned this for weeks, waiting for an opportunity to act. Her account painted a chilling picture of a man driven to desperation, willing to destroy his family to preserve his version of control. Armed with Patrice's testimony, the police issued an Amber Alert for Caleb and began tracking Ronald's movements. They discovered that Ronald had recently purchased 2 plane tickets to Jamaica, where his mother lived. Customs records confirmed that he and Caleb had boarded a flight days earlier, setting off an international manhunt. The discovery of Patrice alive, though a victory, was only the beginning. The race to find Caleb now took precedence, and the case had transformed into a high-stakes pursuit of justice. With Ronald's actions exposed, the police were determined to bring him to account and reunite Caleb with his mother, no matter the obstacles in their way. With Patrice's harrowing account and the revelation that Ronald had fled to Jamaica with Caleb, the case escalated into an international operation. The Amber Alert issued for Caleb became the centerpiece of the investigation, with media outlets broadcasting his image and description across the country. The public was urged to come forward with any information, and federal agencies, including the FBI, were brought in to assist. The police confirmed Ronald's departure from the U.S. through customs records and airport surveillance footage. Grainy images showed him boarding a flight to Kingston, Jamaica, holding Caleb's hand. Caleb appeared confused but unharmed in the footage, though his expression betrayed the fear and uncertainty of being taken away from everything familiar. Investigators learned that Ronald's mother, Eleanor Johnson, lived in a small village outside Montego Bay, and it was assumed he had taken Caleb there. Working with Jamaican authorities, U.S. officials coordinated efforts to locate Caleb. A team of local police officers, assisted by Interpol, visited Eleanor's home the following day. The property was modest, nestled in a rural area surrounded by thick vegetation. Eleanor was cooperative but visibly distressed when the officers arrived. She admitted that Ronald and Caleb had been there briefly but claimed that Ronald had left with Caleb 2 days earlier. She insisted she had no idea where they had gone. The discovery that Ronald had already moved on complicated the search. Authorities began a painstaking investigation, combing through local travel records, surveillance footage, and tips from nearby residents. It became clear that Ronald was trying to evade capture. Witnesses reported seeing him in nearby towns, buying supplies and asking for directions, but his trail remained elusive. For 3 tense days, the manhunt pushed deeper into the Jamaican countryside. Police tracked Ronald's movements through a combination of local reports and forensic clues. A breakthrough came when a resident in a small village reported seeing a man matching Ronald's description hiding in an abandoned shack. The informant described him as nervous and secretive, always keeping Caleb close and avoiding interaction with others. A tactical team was assembled to approach the shack, which was located deep in the woods. The officers moved incautiously, surrounding the area to ensure there was no escape. As they approached, they spotted Caleb playing in the yard, his face smudged with dirt but otherwise unharmed. The sight of him alone was a relief, but it also raised the stakes. Any sudden move could put the child in danger. One of the officers coaxed Caleb away from the shack, using a calm and reassuring demeanor. Caleb hesitated but eventually walked toward the officer, his small hands clutching a toy car. Once he was safely out of harm's way, the team advanced on the shack. Ronald, realizing he was surrounded, initially resisted but soon surrendered without incident. He was subdued and taken into custody. Caleb, now in the care of Child Protective Services, was immediately flown back to the U.S. to be reunited with his mother. His return was bittersweet. Though he was physically unharmed, the psychological toll of the ordeal was evident. Caleb clung to the social worker who accompanied him, asking repeatedly when he would see his mother. Back in Jackson, Patrice was still recovering in the hospital when she was informed of Caleb's rescue. The news brought her a sense of relief and validation, but it was tempered by the knowledge that her son had been used as a pawn in her husband's desperate attempt to maintain control. She vowed to do whatever was necessary to support Caleb's recovery and ensure he never had to endure such trauma again. Meanwhile, Ronald was extradited to Mississippi to face charges of kidnapping, domestic assault, and attempted murder. The evidence against him was overwhelming, from Patrice's testimony to the physical evidence found at the house and the actions he had taken to flee. His calm demeanor during questioning unnerved investigators, as he appeared more resigned than remorseful. When asked why he had taken Caleb, Ronald simply stated that he had been trying to protect his son from a life without him. The international cooperation that led to Caleb's safe return was widely praised, but the scars left by the case were profound. Caleb's rescue marked the end of the chase, but the fallout from Ronald's actions was only beginning. For Patrice and Caleb, the long road to healing had just begun, and the Johnson family's dark secrets had been laid bare for the world to see. As Ronald Johnson was extradited back to Jackson, Mississippi, the community watched in shock as the full scope of his actions came to light. The man once seen as a hard-working pilot and devoted father was now the center of a chilling case that exposed the destructive consequences of betrayal and control. News outlets followed every development, and the trial quickly became one of the most talked-about legal proceedings in the city's history. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial. Patrice Johnson, still physically frail from her ordeal, appeared composed yet somber as she prepared to testify against the man she had once loved. Caleb, too young to understand the full extent of what had happened, was kept away from the proceedings and placed under the care of counselors specializing in trauma. Despite his absence, his name was on everyone's lips as the case centered on Ronald's calculated attempt to sever his family ties while maintaining control over their son. The prosecution built a damning case against Ronald, outlining his violent actions and methodical planning. They presented evidence from the Johnson home, including the locked basement room where Patrice had been held captive. Photographs showed the bruises and injuries she had sustained during her captivity, a visceral reminder of the suffering she had endured. Medical reports confirmed Patrice's malnourishment and dehydration, strengthening the argument that Ronald had deliberately left her to die. Ronald's financial records and airline ticket purchases provided further evidence of premeditation. Prosecutors showed how he had used his access as a pilot to facilitate Caleb's abduction, timing his flight schedule to coincide with Patrice's disappearance. The baggage tag found in the basement linked him directly to the scene of the crime, leaving little room for doubt about his involvement. The most powerful testimony came from Patrice herself. Standing before the court, she recounted the events leading up to her captivity in vivid detail. Her voice trembled at times, but she remained steadfast as she described how Ronald had confessed his affair, then turned violent when she threatened to leave with Caleb. She recounted the fear and helplessness she felt as she was restrained and locked in the basement, left to wonder if she would ever see her son again. Her testimony moved many in the courtroom to tears, painting a stark picture of a man consumed by rage and desperation. The defense attempted to argue that Ronald's actions were the result of emotional distress, claiming that he had acted out of fear of losing his family. However, this argument failed to sway the jury, who saw his calculated efforts to abduct Caleb and silence Patrice as proof of his intent. The prosecution countered by highlighting his lack of remorse and the deliberate nature of his crimes. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for just 6 hours before returning with a verdict, guilty on all counts, including kidnapping, domestic assault, and attempted murder. The judge handed down a life sentence without the possibility of parole, citing the severity of Ronald's actions and the profound impact they had on his family. Ronald showed little emotion as the sentence was read, his once proud demeanor replaced by a hollow resignation. For Patrice, the verdict brought a measure of closure but no real solace. The physical and emotional scars left by Ronald's betrayal would take years to heal, and the damage to Caleb's sense of security was a constant concern. Patrice vowed to prioritize her son's well-being, working closely with therapists to help him process the trauma of being taken from his home and separated from his mother. The Johnson home, once a symbol of a stable family life, became a painful reminder of the events that had unfolded there. Patrice chose to sell the property, seeking a fresh start for herself and Caleb. The community rallied around her, organizing support groups and fundraisers to help her rebuild her life. The case also sparked broader conversations about domestic abuse and family violence in Jackson. Patrice used her platform to advocate for survivors, sharing her story at events and partnering with local organizations to raise awareness. Her resilience and determination inspired many, turning her tragedy into a catalyst for change. Caleb, though young, showed remarkable strength as he began to adjust to his new reality. With the support of his mother and counselors, he slowly regained a sense of normalcy, finding solace in the routines of childhood, school, playdates, and time spent with friends. Though the events of his early years would always be a part of his story, Patrice worked tirelessly to ensure they would not define his future. As Ronald began his life behind bars, he became a symbol of the destructive power of unchecked anger and control. His actions had torn his family apart, leaving a legacy of pain and loss that would linger for years to come. Yet for Patrice and Caleb, the story did not end in darkness. Together, they began to rebuild, finding strength in each other and a renewed determination to move forward, no matter the obstacles in their path.